I have a Home Assistant Yellow that runs both Zigbee and Matter on board already. However, I've gotten one of these SkyConnect radios. This is a neat little radio that's made by Home Assistant Nabukasa, and it has Zigbee and Zigbee and Matter on it as well. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to transfer my configuration over from the onboard radio to this SkyConnect on the Yellow, and I'm also going to move my configuration from my Home Assistant Yellow to my production Home Assistant Blue. My Home Assistant Blue doesn't have any Matter or Zigbee radios on it, so we're going to be relying on the SkyConnect as my production radio. In addition, I'll show you some stuff between the Zigbee2MQTT, which is what I'm running, and ZHA, and I will also talk about moving the Zigbee2MQTT configuration from my Home Assistant Yellow, where it is currently running, over to my Home Assistant Blue, so you don't necessarily have to repair all your devices. So let's get started. Before we get into moving radios around and configuration and all that, let's talk about the difference between ZHA and Zigbee2MQTT in my opinion. Remember, this is my opinion. So I'm not going to go through all of the coding and scientific facts and everything else. ZHA, which is on board in a built-in integration in Home Assistant, allows you to connect to Zigbee devices with a built-in integration already in Home Assistant. It is standards compliant and it strives to be standards compliant. That means that if something in the Zigbee community, and if you've played with Zigbee at all, you know there's a lot of manufacturers who don't follow along precisely with the standards. That makes ZHA sometimes hard to use because you have to go and reverse engineer of sorts things to figure out how to get to attributes and settings and whatnot in some of these devices. Whereas Zigbee2MQTT typically has a converter for non-compliant devices that makes it ready to use quickly and more quickly than ZHA would be. So I like that for that aspect. So Zigbee2MQTT also has a nice interface, and you can see what I'm talking about here. It has this interface with a lot of different settings. If you take one of my settings here, for example, one of my devices, for example, the motion here, I don't know how you do this in ZHA. It's a service call probably, and maybe you, with Aquara devices, have gotten a little bit farther with this. But if I want to go to specific settings and I want to change my occupancy timeout, I just put a number in here and it sets it for me. In ZHA, you may have to do a lot more stuff to get that done. So that's another benefit of using Zigbee2MQTT versus using ZHA. ZHA is easier to set up and run. Zigbee2MQTT takes a little bit more time. There are settings in the add-on that you have to set up before you can start it. Zigbee2MQTT requires, by virtue of its name, MQTT to be up and running. ZHA is native to Home Assistant and will just talk to Home Assistant directly. So I use Zigbee2MQTT because I use non-standard devices sometimes, and I want to be able to do things that are more easily ready, and because of the developer community, more quickly added to the Zigbee library of things you can mess with. So that's just an example of why I do that. All right, so let's go over here to Zigbee2MQTT, and this is the stuff I have. I'm not a big Zigbee user. I have a few devices, but I started playing more with the Aquara stuff. So I have these little temperature sensors here. Let me see if you can see that here. Little temperature sensor, which is a little Aquara thing. It's pretty small. I like these for their form factor. They're really tiny. And then I have also these motion sensors here. This is another Aquara motion sensor. They have their own hub, which talks to Home Assistant, but I'd rather go directly to Home Assistant in Zigbee. Now again, Aquara is one of those manufacturers that doesn't necessarily comply with all of the Zigbee standards. To me, Zigbee's more of the wild, wild west. People can make things, and it doesn't have to be perfect before they release it. Aquara is good stuff. I really enjoy their products. I don't have any problem with it. I have some of them running through their native hub, and that's integrated to my Home Assistant that way, and then I have these other ones I'm playing with. So anyway, that's what we have here. We have these 4 devices that are connected to my onboard Zigbee radio in my Home Assistant Yellow. So if you want to use ZHA, you can do that. And what ZHA, let me go directly over to ZHA in my integrations here. If you want to add that, you have to click on Add Integration. It comes out of the box actually, but if it's not there, you can look for ZHA. I actually have it disabled right now. So if I go over here to the top and I show my 4 disabled, here's my Zigbee. You can't run both Zigbee to MQTT and ZHA on the same device with the same controller or coordinator, the radio. But if you have two different coordinators, you can do that. So before I do that, I need to go over to my add-ons and I need to turn off my Zigbee to MQTT. So I'll stop that now. I've already made a backup of my Zigbee to MQTT on my yellow because I'm going to move it over to the blue, and I'll show you that in a little bit. So we'll go back over here to integrations. We will show the disabled and enable this one right here. And it should pick up the radio. And now I already have two devices on here. The Zigbee coordinator, which is the device that's on the Home Assistant yellow already. And I have the Lumi Weather, which is a Query device. So now I have the Zigbee coordinator and I have one device already set up here. This is legacy from when I was playing with it before. If you want to add a new device, you go over here to the Add Device button, and it's now searching for Zigbee devices. If you are moving to ZHA from Zigbee to MQTT, you need to pair all your devices again, unfortunately. So I'm going to take this little temperature sensor here, and I'm just going to hold the button down on it until it flashes blue, which you probably cannot see. Yeah, you can barely see it there. And then I'm going to release it, and let's see if it shows up here. And there it is already. And I can do that with the second one here. Here's a second. Actually, let me do it with my motion sensor. So I'm going to do this with my motion sensor now. It's still in pairing mode. So I'll hold down the button here. The light will flash on it. 3 flashes, and I'll let go of it. And it'll flash again, and it should pick up the motion sensor as well. And there's our motion sensor. Now I can change these device names to what I want. So I'm going to call this X temp because that's what's on the little thing. I wrote an X on it so I know which one it is. And then I'm going to change this to Studio Motion because that's what this is. And those are ready to use. And then go back out of here. And now I have Studio Motion and X temp in here. And you can look at these. They are exposed as devices in Home Assistant. This is tied directly to my yellow. One of the other reasons I did not do this in ZHA when I first started is because my yellow had the Zigbee radio in it, but my Home Assistant blue is my production device. In order to get my Zigbee radio traffic or my Zigbee entities over to my blue, I had to use MQTT because I'm running an MQTT broker on the blue. So that allowed me to send all of these values like my temperature, pressure, humidity, all that over to my Home Assistant blue where I run everything using MQTT. ZHA, as far as I know, doesn't have a way for me to get my entity values or attributes over to my Home Assistant blue when I'm using the ZHA integration. So that's as simple as adding a device to the ZHA stuff. And we can look at motion here. If I move it around, hopefully it should change to that. And there's a timeout on these devices to save the battery. So right now it says its occupancy is detected. And after, I don't know how many seconds the default is, it will go back to undetected here for the occupancy. Anyway, that's using ZHA. There's not a lot to it, and I don't want to make the video super long, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. The points here is Zigbee to MQTT and ZHA cannot coexist on the same device with the same radio or same coordinator. You have to be able to use a different coordinator or run one or the other. So now what I want to do is the fun part is I want to move over to the SkyConnect radio on this device right here. So I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go ahead and just disable this integration again. I'll come over here and I will disable the integration. Now that the Zigbee radio or the ZHA integration is stopped, I'm going to go back into a hardware section. I've already plugged in my SkyConnect to this particular device, my Home Assistant yellow. Over here, I want to look at all hardware and I need to find the address of the USB device that's the SkyConnect. And you don't want to use TTY USB 0. You want to use serial by ID because this doesn't change. The TTY USB 0, if you unplug something and plug it back in, may change, and then you have the wrong device. If you use the serial by ID, it doesn't change, and it will always reference that device. So I'm going to copy that whole thing because we're going to need it in a minute. And remember, I've already plugged in the SkyConnect, so that's why it sees it there. So now if I go over to my add-ons page, and I open up the configuration for Zigbee to MQTT, I'm going to change the port to that port I just copied. Now, I wouldn't do this normally other than to demonstrate that you can use a different radio on the yellow, because the yellow has a built-in radio already. You could run Zigbee to MQTT with the SkyConnect and run everything else with the ZHA. So you could run two coordinators on the yellow this way if you wanted to do that. So this is still useful in that scenario. But if you're running everything on the built-in yellow, you don't need to do any of this. This is a demonstration to show you SkyConnect moving from the onboard to the SkyConnect. You want to leave the adapter as EZSP, which is the type it is there. And then we'll just save that. And we'll go over here and we'll start up Zigbee to MQTT. So start it. We'll give it a couple of minutes to start up. It's got to do all its business. And then we will open up the web UI. If you get a bad gateway, it's because it's not started yet. Give it a couple of minutes. So all of our devices are here. We don't really have to do anything else. We're just running on a new coordinator. Everything is connected to it and doing what it's supposed to. Now, Zigbee's funny and finicky. So this may not happen for you correctly. You just have to make sure that everything is working that is supposed to be working. So for example, if I take this one that I paired to ZHA, has a little X on it. Remember, I paired that to ZHA just a minute ago. If I go look at this and I look at the exposes and I look at the temperature, I should see a temperature change. I'm just going to hold it in my hand for a second, kind of warm it up. And we're going to look at these temperature changes. And if that's updating properly, that means that we have good communication between this Zigbee device, and you see it there, just changed. That means it's working. Again, Zigbee's finicky, and especially with non-standard compliant devices such as this Aquarius stuff. For example, my motion sensor, I've been having a real problem with this lately because I've bounced between different devices. It's not currently working. So this is one I may have to repair, and you just click on that button there to join it. Hold it down like you would before with the little light flashing. Let go of it and let it try to repair. I'm not going to say that this is exactly working, but there you go. You can see that it worked fine after that. So when you're moving things around, and I don't recommend you do what I've been doing the last 2 days and moving things all over the place. I've gone from the yellow to ZHA to the yellow, back to the SkyConnect, back to the onboard, over to the blue, just to make this video. So I probably got some weirdness in my network. Once you get things situated, especially with Z2M, I find it's pretty stable. As long as you have good coverage and you can reach these devices, and you can see here the LQI, the quality indicator, this tells you how well it's hearing it. If you have a good number there and you have leave things alone, typically your Zigbee stuff runs fine. There are lots of horror stories where that's not always the case, but in this case, it seems to be all right. Okay, so now we're running on the SkyConnect, but again, that's kind of pointless. What I want to do now is I want to go over here to our settings, advanced, actually tools, and I want to request a Z2M backup, because what we're going to do is take all of this stuff from our Zigbee to MQTT on my yellow and move it over to my Home Assistant blue. So I'm going to request the backup. It's pretty quick, and then I will download the backup and it'll put it down here in my into my file system on the local PC. And I'm going to go over to my Home Assistant blue and I'm going to install through the add-on store the Zigbee to MQTT. Let me search for it here. The main one here, not the edge, not the proxy. I'm just going to do the regular MQTT setup here. We're going to install it. And before we start it, number one, we need to put the radio on there. So let me go move the radio and I'll be right back with you. Before we start this, remember what we did on the yellow. We had to go on there and we had to go find the hardware. So let's go find the hardware section here and find out, make sure our USB SkyConnect is showing up properly. So we'll just scroll down here till we find the SkyConnect. And it does recognize it. I didn't have to reboot anything. I just plugged it in. So I'll copy that because we're going to need that here in just a moment, like we did before. So let's go to add-ons, add-on dashboard here. Go back in here. We're going to configuration. And we're going to set up a port like that. And we're going to say adapter again, or type adapter in as EZSP. And since we haven't set up MQTT, it will not allow you to start this add-on until you have the MQTT configured. So we'll get our configuration and paste it in here. So this is the settings for MQTT. This is your base topic. I'll leave that as Zigbee to MQTT. When it shows up in your MQTT feed, it will be this topic here as your base topic. The server will be the location of your server, wherever your MQTT server is, and then of course your username and password. So put all that information in, click on save, go back into info, and then start it up. And fingers crossed everything works like it's supposed to. You can always watch the logs, of course, and see what it's doing. It takes a couple of minutes for it to start fully in some cases, not all cases. So give it some time to start before you try to go to the web UI. And once you start seeing all this stuff, then it's ready to go. Go back to info. You can set it to show in the sidebar as well so that you can get to it over here in the sidebar. So we'll go to the web UI. And we have no devices in here because this is a brand new configuration. But we did back up our configuration from before. So I started it up to show you there's nothing here. What we need to do now is we need to go back over and stop this. And I've got the Samba share installed. So in my add-ons, I am using Samba. And this means I can get to the folders on my Home Assistant Blue to do things with. One of the folders that I want to go to is the configuration folder. And when you install Zigbee to MQTT, there is a Zigbee to MQTT folder down here. And if you open it up, it's got some stuff already in it. And remember that we backed up our MQTT from the other server. And here are the files here that are already in here. You've got your configuration, database, devices, group, state. The important files here that you want to copy over is your database file, your devices, and if you have any groups. I didn't have any groups, so I'm going to just copy database and devices over. I'm not going to change configuration because that's a configuration that's stored in that config section that you put in the add-on just a minute ago. So leave that alone. We just drag this over here. And it asks me here if I want to replace the files. I do. So I'm replacing both of those files. So I can close this out now, get rid of this, go back into the add-on, and let's start it up and see what it does. And again, you've got to give it a few minutes to start up, or you're going to get the bad gateway up here. Okay, now it's all started up, and all of my devices that I had on my other system are now here as well. The difference is that the name is not the name that is in the file. And I'm not sure why that happens, but I've had to rename these things. You don't have to repair them, meaning you don't have to rejoin them to the coordinator, but you do have to probably rename them unless somebody knows why it doesn't rename them. Hello, editing future self. So when I was talking about the reason why things weren't renamed when I migrated, I figured out what that is. So let me just take you through here. In my original Home Assistant Yellow configuration, the devices file and the groups file are listed here in the configuration.yaml file. And so it's going to go look at those two files to get device names. In the other blue version of Home Assistant or of Zigbee to MQTT, for whatever reason, it doesn't show that mapping, that file mapping. And so what we need to do then is when you migrate over, either put the devices from that device file in your configuration.yaml directly through the editor, or go in here to your Home Assistant Blue or whatever you're migrating to. If the names don't show up, make sure Zigbee to MQTT is not running when you do this. Copy this devices entry here from the other system, put it in this file over here. So it'd be something like this. Let me copy that and then put it over here. And now it's going to look at the devices file for the device's name. And then these things would be pulled out of here. So I don't know why when you install this, it's different. But on the Home Assistant Yellow, when I installed Zigbee to MQTT, it put the devices in a device file and referenced that in the configuration.yaml. And when I did that over in the blue, it did not do that. So just want to bring you up to speed on that, let you know that there is a way to have the names go along when you do the migration on Zigbee to MQTT. Just make sure it's looking at the right file for the names if those are separated out of your configuration.yaml. All right, back to the video. So I'm going to go into those files again, and you can see the devices file. This device file has the ID, which is this right here, and it also has the friendly name. Now it should automatically pick those up. Again, I don't know why it doesn't do that. Somebody knows how to do this the right way, let me know. But you can go in here and you can just map this. So this first one, 6A68, I'm just going to copy that name. You can click on it here, the edit button, and just change the name right here and rename device. Now what this also does is if you've already been sending stuff to your Home Assistant instance via MQTT, if you change the name here, you don't have to go in and rename all your entities. If you have automations and other things that work against these entities in Zigbee, you can change the name here and it will automatically start using those in your Home Assistant instance. So then you change all the rest of these things to the correct names and you're back in business. And all of your information is coming in through this system. Let me just look for the X mark that we're playing with. That is 6B56. So I'll just rename that one as well. 6EB56, that one right there. I will give it the new name as well, rename it. Now I'd also, you notice here, I also don't update Home Assistant Entity ID. If you've already been using these, that's already in there. You shouldn't have to update it as long as the name is exactly the same. So if I look at this now on the new system, and I look at exposes and I grab it, it's this device right here again, and I kind of hold on to it and see if it warms up. If everything's working properly, we should see an update in the temperature on this right here. And you're seeing the humidity and temperature change because I'm holding on to it. So we have now moved our entire configuration from our Home Assistant Yellow's Zigbee2MQTT installer add-on over to the Home Assistant Zigbee2MQTT on my Home Assistant Blue. If you have 100 devices, this is going to be very, very nice for you to be able to do. If you want to migrate radios, you can do that as well. Now, ZHA does give you the ability to migrate radios. It's the same kind of thing you're doing here. But again, I'm using Zigbee2MQTT, and I'm moving from one whole system to another whole system using the SkyConnect. So on my Home Assistant Blue, I now have a Zigbee radio using SkyConnect and a Matter radio using SkyConnect. Matter is still Matter, and it's still going to be worked on, and stuff is going to continue to happen in that area. CES was a big Matter showcase. I will be talking more about Matter as more stuff becomes available to it, but we'll be able to use that same SkyConnect radio and apply Matter capability to our Home Assistant or anything else that you run Home Assistant on that doesn't have a built-in Matter radio. All right, let me know if you have any questions down below. I hope this wasn't too confusing. If I want to recap the high points here, I use Zigbee2MQTT. I have a SkyConnect radio made by Nabucasa now. I want to be able to run my Zigbee network on my Home Assistant Blue, which is my production. So I took all my configuration that was on my yellow under Z2M, and I moved it to my Home Assistant Blue under Z2M using that SkyConnect radio. So that's all of what I've done today, with a little bit of blah, blah, blah sprinkled in with that. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not a channel member and want to support my crazy blah talking business here and my videos, become a channel member as well. That will definitely be appreciated. And we will see you on the next video.